Up till now, we have looked at selfing and outcrossing as two opposing and exclusive strategies. But over half of populations with known selfing rates seem to be mixed mating. This is quite a high number to be just an evolutionary transient state. Other evolutionary forces must come into play which allow for the maintenance of mixed mating. Typically, mixed mating can be easily accounted for if we add environmental variability. For instance, pollinators' abundance can vary on different temporal and spatial scales. When pollinators are abundant, the plants reproducing through outcrossing will be efficiently pollinated and produce seed that does not suffer in breeding depression. Under these circumstances, plants that reproduce via selfing will be disadvantaged because their offspring suffers in breeding depression. So with invariable, highly abundant pollinators, the best mating strategy is purely outcrossing and the worst is purely selfing. If the pollinators are scarce or absent from the environment, plants that reproduce via selfing will be able to produce seeds. Even though these seeds suffer from inbreeding depression, the fitness of selfing plants will be still higher than the fitness of outcrossing plants, which produce no seeds at all without pollinators. In this case, the best strategy would be purely selfing strategies. However, if pollinators' abundance varies, the best mating strategy would be mixed. An individual that is capable of selfing and outcrossing will always be able to produce some offspring, regardless of whether it can be cross-pollinated or not. Under such a variable environment, the best mating strategy is bed hedging mixed mating. The individual invests a bit in both self and outcrossing, and even if from time to time it suffers a reproductive loss, on the long run it averages to a net gain of fitness. Fixed mixed mating strategies are useful if the environmental variation is unpredictable. But if the environmental variation is predictable, the best strategy is mixed mating, which is plastic. Namely, a single plant can change its mating strategy from predominantly selfing to predominantly outcrossing in response to predictable environmental variation. A typical example is seasonal variation of pollinators, which tend to be more abundant in the warm than in the cold seasons. If a plant is capable of reliably predicting the environment, it should increase self-pollination when it is more advantageous and increase cross-pollination when pollinators are abundant and cross-pollination is more advantageous. This is the case in some hercogamous plants which start their reproductive season by not being able to cross-pollinate, but if they're not sufficiently pollinated, they change the configuration of their anthers so that they could self-pollinate and thus assure their reproductive persistence. A typical case of plastic mixed mating is found in cleistogamous plants. Cleistogamy is the ability that some plants have to produce closed, obligately self-pollinated flowers. Most cleistogamous species also produce open flowers which are potentially outcrossed. If open flowers substantially outcross, then the selfing rate of the plant can be simply deduced from its proportion of closed cleistogamous flowers. Cleistogamy is often plastic, and the proportion of closed flowers can vary in response to environmental cues. In Lamium amplexicoli, for instance, the production of open flowers can vary between 50% in warm, long days and up to 100% in cold, short days. It is assumed that closed flowers are favored in resource-poor and stressful environments, which limit the plant development, whereas showy, open flowers are produced when the plant has sufficient resources and low stress exposition. Alternatively, cleistogamy could be an adaptation to pollinators' abundance. When environmental cues indicate high pollinators' activity, the production of open flowers would be favored, whereas closed flowers, which pollinate autonomously, would be favored when environmental cues indicate pollinator-scarce environments.